Now it's what it does to your system is it kind of shocks you. You go from 50 to 80, you know, it's like, what the world's going on here? You know, it doesn't feel quite right. Well, I'm gonna have to text Leroy. You know, I know he's usually here. He wore out from all that cooking and fishing. He was fishing yesterday too. No, we didn't catch much at all. We did very badly. It was too nice of weather. That's true. I never catch fish when it's bright and sunny and no wind, because they can see you from everywhere. I mean, it's like, it's hard to catch them when it's like that. The only way you usually catch them is on a worm or something like that, and I couldn't even do it with that. They wouldn't bite my worm either, so. No, it was about perfect. It was like 72, 73. So it was just absolutely gorgeous. But for Moses Lake not to have any wind, it's probably happens about 3 days a year, and we were on 2 of them. Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't windy. What's going on back there? You're making noise.
Joyce is making noise.
Oh, Joyce is making noise. Well, we're going to get started because we're already late. It's 5:33. So.
John's here, so it's perfect.
Well, John's here. What do you know? Hello, John. Man, I'm fine. Here you go. So, I think we're ready to go here. We're going to sing it, not a lot, because look at all of us. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Not a lot. So I'm going to sing them. Let's sing 17. It's Beautiful Savior. So I hope I got it started on near the right pitch. So it's number 17, Beautiful Savior. Oh, the wrong book, yeah. You can find it in the gray book. It's the same words, same tune, but yeah, I don't know the number though. Beautiful Savior, King of creation, Son of God and Son of man, truly I love thee, truly I'd serve thee, light of my soul, my joy, my crown. Fair are the meadows, fair are the woodlands, robed in flowers of blooming spring. Jesus is fairer, Jesus is purer, he makes our souring spirits sing. Fair is the sunshine, fair is the moonlight, bright the sparkling stars on high. Jesus shines brighter, Jesus shines purer than all the angels in the sky. Beautiful Savior, Lord of the nations, Son of God and Son of man, glory and honor, praise and now and forevermore be thine. And these are the words that we're going to read and use them as our greeting from Revelation. Grace and peace to you from him who is and who was and who is to come, and from the seven spirits before his throne, and from Jesus Christ, who is the faithful witness, the firstborn from dead and the ruler of the kings of the earth. Amen. So we have to turn to Ephesians, and now we're all the way in chapter 6 already. Chapter 6. There we read, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on earth. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Slaves, obey your earthly masters, and respect and fear, and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but like slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, not men, because you know that the Lord will reward everyone for whatever good he does, whether he is a slave or free. And masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. All right, you may be seated. So when I started to plan this out, I didn't realize that on Mother's Day I was going to have two passages that were so similar in nature. And so, you know, I'm not going to spend most of my time on that because I thought I preached a sermon on that this morning. You know, so John, you're just going to have to bear with us. But I preached on honor your father and mother this morning. So we'll answer them quickly. How should children obey their parents? It says something a little different than what I said this morning. Well, that's what the text this morning said in everything. This one says in the Lord. In the Lord. So that's how they ought to do this. They ought to honor their parents in the Lord. And that's another way of what was said this morning. It pleases the Lord if we honor our parents. So now, since I defined this morning, you should know the answer to this. What does it mean to honor your father and mother? What was that? Do the dishes, yeah. That was my illustration, you know. Wash the car, yeah. If they ask you to do something, you do it, right? You honor them, and you do it without complaining. You do it well. And it means that you respect them in all that they say and do. Because honor is more than obedience, as I said this morning. But here's a promise that was somewhat talked about this morning. What promise is given to children who honor their father and mother? It'll go well with you and you'll enjoy a long life. Does that always happen? No. Well, in my household, if I didn't obey, it went well with, if I obeyed, it went well with me. If I didn't obey, it did not go well with me. So that was universal, you know. You didn't obey, you paid the price for not obeying. Now, my father, I can't ever remember him physically punishing me. But he could give a look that would wilt you. You know, if you were not doing what you were supposed to be doing, that's all it took was that look, you know. All right, Paul, that's enough of that. Get with it, you know. And but it goes well with you when you obey your parents. And if you don't obey them, it doesn't go so well. Yeah, they're the authority that God's. I mean, there's some obvious things about this. I mean, when a child is small, they always want to reach up and touch the burners, it seems, on the stove, right? I mean, this is almost universal. So what do? You teach the child not to do that, right? Sometimes they still do it because they're not going to listen to you, but at least you've tried. You try to teach them how to cross the road so they don't get hit by cars and things like that. And because it goes well with them if they're listening to you. The child that doesn't listen, it often doesn't go well. Things happen that are predictable. If they're just being careless or disobedient, then things happen. And most of the time, people who live this way do enjoy a long life on earth. I mean, yeah. Yeah, they wouldn't have died had they not disobeyed. They still lived an awfully long time. I mean, but everything went haywire then because it was just go to the garden and get what you want to eat, and everything was supplied. And now we're cast out of here, and we got to work, and we got to sweat, and there's weeds, and there's trouble, and our son kills our other son. I mean, it's just downhill from there because they're not obeying their parents. They're not honoring their father and mother. So now this is where we're going to get into new territory. So I'm going to spend more time here. First of all, because not everybody always knows what every word in the Bible means, whether it's in English or Greek. What does this word exasperate mean? Fathers, do not exasperate your children.
Mine says stir up.
Stir up. Well, all right. Yours isn't a good trend. I don't know. Stir up. Yeah, it's kind of along that line. I had an illustration once when I was preaching on this sermon, and I blew up a balloon. And to illustrate what it means to be exasperated, I let the air out of the balloon. And it would go, as I'd let the air out. And it would just kind of shrivel up, right? And I thought, well, that's a good idea of what when you exasperate a child, they shrivel up really. They don't become what they should be, and they're in pain actually a lot of times. Yeah. If you're exasperated, you're ticked off. You're angry about it. And I gave a lot of examples, and so I'm going to see tonight how many examples we can come up with of ways to exasperate children. I'll give you one to start out with. I don't know if that was the one I was going to get. What did you say? Not what? Not doing the dishes. We're back to the dishes again. All right. Well, here's how you exasperate children. This is the one, and this may seem strange. You're too lenient with them. I've known children that had such lenient parents, let them do anything they wanted, and they were exasperated, and they were exasperating. I mean, they became kids who just had no boundaries or didn't know right from wrong. And a lenient parent is exasperating. So you get it on the flip side of that, right? A parent that's oppressively overbearing exasperates a child too. Certain personalities of children can take a lenient parent or could take a parent who is overbearing and be okay. I have a personality that people can yell at me and I just smile a little bit, and it's okay, if that's the way you feel. I'm not gonna take this personally, or if you're screaming at me, but that's all right. But other kids, they just wilt. They can't handle it. Of my 4 children, if I said anything in a stern voice to my oldest daughter, it was like trouble. I had to backtrack, yeah.
I was going to say, anytime I've ever been yelled at, I just stop listening.
Yeah, that's another thing that happens.
That's too much for me. I can't.
Yeah.
I just stop listening because I can't handle it.
Yeah, That's exactly right. So you get exasperated, you don't listen, you don't obey, you just kind of shut down. They know that. Yeah. Well, you guys want to sit together and work this out? Yeah, but you know, it is. But I sat down before I did this many years ago, before I wrote this sermon, and I wrote down at least 25 ways to exasperate a child. It's pretty easy. Scream at them a name that they don't like. You're going to exasperate them. You know, you knucklehead, what are you doing? You know. Now, I call my grandchildren Wiener Schnitzels, but they know I'm not mad at them when I'm calling them a Wiener Schnitzel. They just know they're rascals, and that's what I call them, you know. So that's okay. But if I said, "You Wiener Schnitzel, what are you doing now?" You know, the tone of voice could make all the difference in the world. I always say to me, "I'm not a Wiener Schnitzel," just proving my point even more. But you know, you can exasperate. What are other ways you can exasperate a child? Expecting high expectations. Yeah, higher than reasonable expectations. You put your expectations way beyond the child. That child is going to have trouble, you know, because they're not going to be able to attain that. Now, certain cultures in our society seem to do this repeatedly. The suicide rate in Asian countries, particularly Japan, is really high for young people because they expect you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to get to school, you're never going to have any failure whatsoever, and that just messes those kids up, you know, because they aren't going to pass everything, they're not going to do everything, and one kid may be able to handle a system like that where another one can't, you know. I haven't hit the chief one yet, so we'll see once if anybody comes up with it. The chief way to exasperate a child.
Teasing.
Pardon?
Teasing.
Well, maybe teasing, yeah, but I got one that's far worse.
But never letting them have their own way or some kind of reward.
Yeah, you never say anything good. You never did anything good enough. Yeah, yeah. Here's what I'm thinking about.
You have two kids and you treat one better than the other.
That's what exasperate them, yes. And they know that right away. You're treating one, you've got a favorite. Well, I have my favorites too. I mean, we had the golden child, we had the platinum child, we had the silver child, and we had the lead child. Now, I don't know if the lead child thought she was that bad or not, but we've upgraded her now. She's pewter. So, but you know, you're right. And that daughter knew golden child, platinum child, silver. She knew exactly where she stood in the spectrum. And it wasn't like we didn't love her or anything. We loved her to pieces. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But, you know, we jokingly say things, but it affects them. So here's what I think is the most exasperating thing to children. If you are a fake Christian, you say one thing and do another. And boy, do they pick up on that. You know, I've seen it particularly with young men. I've seen it with young women too. But I've seen it where their parents weren't practicing their faith in a constructive way. And then the dad will come up to me eventually and say, "I don't know why my sons never want to come to church anymore." Well, that's because you had a million excuses and you were hardly ever here. You know, you set an example for them, and you exasperated them because they saw your faith wasn't really that real. They saw you during the week. You know, they saw you in church, and it's like, well, this guy. The classic story is on the way to church. You know, everybody's screaming at each other in the car about everything that's going on. And then they get to church and they all smile nicely. "Isn't it good to see you this morning? You act really," and everybody knows that. So that's how I think when you don't practice your faith, you exasperate. You talked about Adam and Eve. We don't know whether those children were born before or after the fall. It doesn't tell us that. But they were exasperated because they had imperfect parents. And they didn't practice their faith because they should have walked with the Lord in the garden. Instead, they disobeyed. And that always leads to problems. I mean, look at the patriarchs. Just take all the patriarchs as examples. They all, at one time or another, did not practice their faith. Abraham, oh, I'm not having a child. Well, let's have the handmaiden here and we can have a child. And we got Ishmael in. Well, that didn't work out real well. Well, Sarah wasn't against it, but because she thought, well, then that way I can get a child too. But that really was not trusting in God. Jacob, of course, I mean, he's all over the map. 4 different wives, 12 children, 13 counting Dinah, 12 boys, 1 girl, and and we mentioned it here before. He had his favorite, right? Yeah. Boy, that worked out real well, didn't it? You have Joseph, and then you have Benjamin. These are the favorites, and the other brothers not so happy with them. Now, Isaac wasn't. Well, Isaac had favorites too. They had 2 sons, right? Jacob and Esau. And which one did Isaac like? Esau. He was a man's man. He was out there hunting. He was bringing in the food. He was a guide, and Isaac liked him. He didn't care much for Jacob, but Jacob was the chosen one of God. But in the patriarchs, we have a negative example of how to be a parent. In all of them, particularly the story of Jacob. It's like, if there could be something you do wrong to exasperate your children, Jacob did it. He was real good at it. He did a lot of things to exasperate. And he wasn't living his faith out the way he should have. And that's almost always the case. Now, there's some really serious ones that exasperate children. Physical abuse. Anybody who physically abuses a child, I guarantee you that child's going to be accepted. Sexual abuse. I wish I'd never heard of it in the church, but I can give you way too many examples of children that were sexually abused. And by people that, if I would tell people in those churches, they'd be shocked. Because I dealt with it, and it happens. Those are the things, that exasperate children. Those really, really ruin their lives. Alan worked in nursing, psych nursing for 40 years, and almost every one of those people had something in their life, usually as a child, that was horrific, and they couldn't get past that. Most sexually overactive young women have learned that the way you get a man's attention is through sex, because they were taught that. And that exasperates them when they get out in life. They don't know how to have a right relationship. They don't know how to do that. So, you can exasperate children. The young people that I worked with at Wedgwood Acres were primarily exasperated with their parents for 2 reasons. Their parents didn't have faith. That was primary. The second thing, the parents didn't give a rip about them. They didn't care about them at all. And they never seemed to indicate that in a way that was constructive. Another way to exasperate your children is to not love your wife. I don't know all your histories, but have any of you gone through divorce? Anybody here? Yeah, okay. Didn't do a great thing for your children, I bet, did it? Yeah. I know this from practical experience because I've seen it so many times. Children, even adult children, are exasperated. They can't figure this out. They can't get their mind around it, and that their parents would do this, and it exasperates them. So there's many ways to exasperate them. Now, this is a question I want someone to answer. Why doesn't it say fathers and mothers do not exasperate your children? What do you think? Huh? He is. The buck stops with them. Okay. I don't disagree with that. Because it's Mother's Day. All right. Well, I'll just take my own family as an example. I don't believe Ellen exasperated the children very often. Me, on the other hand, I could do that. I mean, I'm a morning person, so I get up in the morning and I'm fixing breakfast and I'm singing, and one or two of my children are exasperated with me right away in the beginning of, Dad, you're way too happy for this time of the morning. You know, it shouldn't be that way, you know. And so I'm exasperating them. And I'm also the one that had the heavier hand. You know, I mean, Ellen was much more reasonable and logical than I am. They would do something frustrating and I would yell at them. You know, she'd never yell. So she didn't exasperate the children quite as much. And now my children tell me, Dad, you're not the same as you used to be. Well, maybe I was a little bit more easily exasperated myself. I don't know, but I wasn't as patient, let's put it that way, as Ellen. Ellen has so much patience. So I don't think I'm entirely wrong. I think you get a good point here. Fathers, you're the head, don't you do this. But I think it's also more often the father than the mother that exasperates a child. That's just been my experience, that they can be the exasperators much more. Mothers seem to be much more encouraging, you know. Yeah, you get that too. That was one thing that Ellen was really good at, is she would say, Dad's right, you know. He just said it too loud. or something like that, you know. But Dad is right. So we were always supportive of each other, but she would point out where I was at fault too, you know, and I was. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, I know that when I look back, you know. And my personality seems to be more difficult on girls than it is on my boys. And in a general rule, I find that true too. I mean, I coach teams, and I give so much credit to any person who can coach a bunch of girls, because I'd coach guys and I'd say, now you have to do this. And I'd take them out of the game and say, you're not doing what I told you to, and you're not going in until you get this in your head that that's what you have to do. You have to pass the basketball. They don't start to cry. They don't carry on. You know, if I said that to a girl, it's all over. I can't play anymore. You know, he doesn't like me. No, I'm just trying to. But guys are different that way. You know, I mean, my coaches all yelled at me. They weren't Bobby Knight, but they would all yell at me, and they'd all let me know, you know, this is the way you're supposed to play this game. And I never felt like, hey, these guys don't like me. No. But a girl, a young woman, might think, oh, he really doesn't like me at all. And I think that's sometimes the difference. But I know I'd be in big trouble. You can't say these things in society today, that there's a difference between the sexes. But I think there is, whether they want to believe it or not. You know, God didn't create us the same. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been necessary to have a wife, you know. But yeah, so you can just keep adding to that list. If you want more to your list, just read the story of the patriarchs again, and you'll find more things, that dumb things that they did that really exasperated their children. And well, even another person by the name of David, the man after God's own heart, he exasperated his children so much that they all fell into his sin. They compounded what he did. And so you end up with his one son, Absalom. Yeah, I mean, it's just a mess. And that's because he exasperated his children. He didn't know. You had something, Russ?
He had no discipline in his family.
No. Well, you know, you think of Eli. He had no discipline over Hophni and Phinehas. I mean, he told them to stop doing that. Hey, you're doing something as serious as what they were doing. You need more than tell them stop doing that. You tell the other Levites, these guys are never allowed in the temple anymore, because look what they're doing. You know, they can't. But so Eli was judged because he wasn't holding his sons accountable, even if they were adults. You know, he had to do that. So you can exasperate children in many ways. But now, this is especially here for Dan, What are you supposed to do rather than exasperate them? Oh, I thought you would say send them to the Christian school because it says bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Well, this is the great Christian school text in my mind in the Bible. You know, why do we send our kids to Christian schools? To bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. And you start that in the home. You know, that's where you start it, and then they don't get exasperated. But you also should do that in other ways. Yeah? Nope. If it's not happening at home, it doesn't usually go well at school either. That's true. No matter what kind of school they're going to. But school is not, that's good statement. School is not a substitute for the parents. And, you know, and parents do that. I think it's worse today than it used to be. You know, they send them to school and they expect you to deal with all the problems that the child has. Well, you know, and then they get mad at the school because the school's not changing their child to be what they hope the child would be. Well, you know, it's not, it starts at the home. Yeah. I mean, we always talked about the three-legged stool, the church, the school, and the home. And those three are what we use to mold the child to be what he or she should be. Bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Now that could be exasperating depending on how you do it. It depends how you do that. You know, you could do it in a way that's really winsome and helps them out, or you can do it in a way that's overbearing and then pushes them away. I remember a young man, he's not young anymore, but anyway, he went to church all his life, and he went to a class, and he was one of these inquisitive guys in class, so he'd ask questions. Teachers would get mad at him. Well, you shouldn't ask those questions. Well, eventually he said, well, if I can't ask questions here, where can I ask them? So I'm not going to be part of the church anymore. So he told me, I can't even go in that building anymore because of the way they treated me. I felt very maligned by my teacher. And I've had teachers teach that way, you know, that they think that they have to just like force this instead of having it be something that they should want and desire for themselves. But you have to bring people up in the training and instruction of the Lord. That's the opposite of exasperating. I think Jacob needed a good Christian school for his kids. He could have almost had one by himself with his own family, you know. He had 13 of them, so he could have had a good start at a Christian school, but he needed a little help. He was not a good father, that's for sure. I think so too. I mean, I loved having students in my classes that asked me questions that might even be off the wall sometimes. I'm like, because they're thinking then, they're anticipating or, you know, trying to understand what you're teaching them. Yeah, they're interacting, and I mean, I like them because the ones that just sat there like nothing and didn't ever respond, weren't any help at all in the class. They didn't get the discussion where it was supposed to go, but you know. But that's the way I like it in class. But you know, people who ask questions, they always say that the only dumb question is the one you don't ask. So if you've got a question in your mind, you're afraid to ask it, that's pretty dumb. You got to find out the answer. But there are things I can't answer and never will be able to answer them. Maybe when I get to glory, I'll have enough insight, because now we see through glass darkly, but then we'll see face to face. So there are things that I can't always answer. I like it when somebody stumps me with something. I say, well, you look in the Bible, you come up with an answer, and I'll look in the Bible, we come up with an answer, we can believe that together. But, anyway, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I talked about that this morning a little bit because my father told me when I was a young man, read Proverbs. And they did bring us up in the training and instruction of the Lord. We never went to a meal where we didn't have the Bible read and talked about, and we'd pray together and we would learn together. So you were right there in the home. You were doing that, and I think it's important to do that, because if faith is only on Sunday, it's really not faith at all. It's got to be practiced in the house. But just a reminder, we're in this section of, under this verse, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. So children submit to their parents by obedience. Parents submit to their children by not exasperating them and by bringing them up in the training and instruction of the Lord, because that's how you submit to them. Now, if you've been a parent, and I think almost everybody, have you been a parent, Mike? Oh yeah, okay. So you know that you actually give yourself up for your children all the time. You submit to them and their needs, right? And most of your life is doing that. You work so that you can supply for them. You shop so you can feed them. You do all these things. You submit to them. And so I had one young man tell me, oh, parents aren't supposed to submit to their children. Children are supposed to submit to their parents. I said, well, when you're a little bit older and you've been a parent long enough, then we can have that discussion again, because you are to submit to them in these positive ways. It even becomes clearer as we look at the next section, is how the submission comes into play. And there we read about slaves. I should preface this. Slavery in the ancient world was ugly, but it wasn't the ugly slavery like we had in the United States. The slavery in the United States was predominantly one race being subjected to another. Slavery in the ancient world took on many forms. If you conquered a country, those people could be your slaves. If someone fell into debt to you, that person could be your slave until the debt was paid. And it didn't have anything to do with color or race or anything else. It had to do with position. And I think when you understand that, you can understand this a little better, because some slaves were going to work for their master. Maybe the deal was, you work for me for 5 years, then you're good. You've paid your debt. Laban said to Jacob, you work for me 7 years, you can have Rachel as your wife. That liar Laban had to work 7 more years to get Rachel. A lot of them had that law, and slaves in the Roman Empire, some of them were very content. They were like maybe the butler in the house, and they took care of this great big mansion, and they did all these good things. So, I think it's good that we don't get confused with what slavery was in the United States, which was absolutely wrong.
The interesting thing with slavery is the biblical version, if you read Leviticus, is you work for whoever you're working for, and at the end of that time, you have the option
Yeah.
to be done or to be submit forever to that
Yeah.
person.
You could get your ear punched. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
And the interesting thing is that if slavery was so bad, then why would anybody want to submit to somebody for the rest of their life?
Yeah. Well, even in the United States, there were masters of slaves that were really pretty good people, and they treated them they were not the norm though, because they treated them worse than they treated their cattle. I mean, it was wrong. So, but it gives us more understanding why the Apostle Paul. This is not a defense for slavery like we had in the United States, because that's indefensible. But it's a defense of how you're to submit to one another. So he's also talking to Christians. So these are Christian slaves working for Christian masters, and how are they to interrelate? So, how should slaves obey their earthly masters? Where's that? I see fear.
Mine says fear and trembling.
Oh, respect and fear, okay. And with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey whom?
Slaves obey your human masters with fear and trembling, in the sincerity of your heart, as you would Christ.
Christ, yeah. So this is what they're saying. You submit to your master as you would, and you do that. You work for them in that way. You do what's right. And you obey them, not only when they're watching to win their favor, but like slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. So twice he makes that point about being slaves of Christ and brings that home. So slaves are to submit to their masters, obey them, not just when they're being watched, but all of the time.
Mine says not to be people pleasers.
Well, you've probably all worked with people like this. I worked with them, and I worked in this one union shop, and I don't think it was just because this man was a union, because not everybody in a union acted this way, but he told me point blank, stop working so hard. You know, we might not have work to do if you get all that finished. You just have to be slower, you know, and you know, he didn't want me to maybe take his job away because I was working as a welder at the time, and you know, but you know, I didn't just work when my boss was watching me. I had a job to do. I knew what I had to do, so I just did it. You know, and he didn't like that because he would only work when the boss was around. Then he looked like he was working hard, you know. But then he'd always need an extended bathroom break too. But, you know, but that's because he wasn't working for Christ. He wasn't a Christian as far as I know. He was just working to make money and get off as easy as he could. Well, how should masters treat their slaves? Yeah, masters, treat your slaves in the same way. In the same way. Treat them. In other words, you have to be submissive to them in that way too, because you know that you have both of a master in heaven who you're accountable to. I mean, he spends a lot of time talking to slaves, more than he does to the masters, because he also talks about serving the Lord, not men, and knowing that the Lord would reward you. And so...
Mine says there's no favoritism with him.
Right, there's no favoritism with God. That's what ours says too. So the master of both, slave and earthly master, is Jesus Christ. And so both of them must always ask the question, what does Jesus Christ want me to do? How does he want me to live in relationship with this other person? And for the slave, it means that there's obedience. And for the master, it means that he treats them with dignity and with the way Christ would, in the same way. Do not threaten them. Do not threaten them, since you know that we both have master. Now, see, that's what was happening all the time with the slaves, which didn't make any sense to me. Why would you beat